That's it. We did it. We're live. We were not live, and now we're live.
It's so good to be live.
It is true. That's a good theme here. So, hello, everybody. I am Andee Kinzy. That's Andee like Gandhi, but without the G. And welcome to the Kicking the Bucket live stream. I see we already have a couple of viewers. We are so glad that you're here. We think of these live streams kind of as a companion to our audio series, our fiction audio drama, Kicking the Bucket. And we encourage you to follow the links below, and that's where you can find more about Kicking the Bucket and our guest for today. I'm very excited to welcome Jinji Willingham. She was one of the facilitators during our pilot listening clubs. I think it was episode 5, right? I think you were, for 5. And Jinji is a licensed professional counselor and a Buddhist end-of-life chaplain. So welcome, Jinji. I'm glad that you're here.
Hi, Andee. It's really nice to be here. This is great. Thank you.
It's a good day, a nice warm day for this. So I am going to start us off with some questions. We are going to be talking about what is a Buddhist chaplaincy, what is sustainable caregiving, various dying practices. It's no longer death meditation. What is it? Various.
I think of it, I mean, one of the terms I've used for workshops or programs is a practice for dying. So a practice, it has multiple components. It's not just one thing. Death meditation is one thing that people do to prepare, but there are books, there are workshops, there's mindfulness practice, there's contemplative, there's a whole variety of things that we can do to wake up to the inevitable truth of what it means to be a human on earth. So I call it a practice for dying, but you could say this is about resources to help us be less terrified and more open. And we can talk about it with our families. We can talk about it with caregivers, like medical caregivers. And mostly it's like our relationship to ourself about finitude, impermanence.
Yeah. So perfect. So those are kind of the two topics we're going to be discussing today are sustainable caregiving and these various practices for dying, amongst other things, of course. Sure. But I'll get us started off. And then if any of the viewers have any questions, please throw it into the chat, or if you're watching this later, feel free to ask questions later. So Jinji, in the Kicking the Bucket audio drama, our main characters, Dolores and Howard, are victims, I think, of what we can call death illiteracy that we have that we kind of have in this country. They just didn't know, right? So I know that you have a very diverse background that spans multiple disciplines. Can you describe your background and your training and how aging and end-of-life caregiving kind of became part of your focus? Because this is an introduction to a person who could be helping them at the end of life that they just didn't know about.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a generous question. I mean, who doesn't love to talk about themselves? But really, what I really meant, I was just being funny. It's such an important topic because we're all on a path. We're all on some path. Ram Dass says we're all just walking each other home. And so one way or another, we all have an experience. It could be a pet when we're little, it could be a grandparent, it could be something out of the normal order, like a parent that dies when a child is young, it could be a partner, and it can be a child. And I think I would say that in hindsight, I realized that one of my father's songs when I was very little was kind of my first realization of impermanence. It was called "I'm Not Wasting My Time." And in it, he kind of talked about I want to live each day like it might be my last day. Might be. And of course, as a 6-year-old, I would sob. And But over the years, I've come back to that because it's very consonant with the teachings of impermanence that come from, I mean, you could say all spiritual systems are aware of and address this, but it's really one of the pillars of Buddhist tradition and teaching and practice. Mm-hmm. So, I can briefly allude to my own personal background and how I found myself on this path. A very I found my brain in my early 20s, went back to college and became a serious student of philosophy, literature, history. And then while I was writing my dissertation, my 4-year-old son passed away suddenly in the middle of the night with no clear understanding. And it was just like everyone would think, it was a devastating trauma. And at the same time, it was a shocking, necessary confrontation and realization of, well, what do you do? What do you do when it's something like that, or your spouse or your parents as they're getting older and you're in a death illiterate culture, or in a culture that has terrific death anxiety? Mm-hmm. And we don't have ancestral wisdom. We don't have thousands of years of multiple generations where parents and grandparents died at home and children saw that. We just get in our car and go someplace else. So I pivoted. After a few years of taking care of myself and my family, I was resolved to become I felt so capable of navigating the bumpy path. I thought, this is what I want to do. This is going to be growthful and helpful and nurturing for me to help others. So I became a therapist, and it's been wonderful. But I really wanted to work at the bedside and in the hospital. So what I learned is the hospitals, don't hire counselors, they hire chaplains. I was already a Buddhist. I kind of spontaneously became a Buddhist in the cemetery during that first year, realizing this is sort of what happens, and we have to find a way to cope with death. So that's very much of a Buddhist central core aspect. So I went to a Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, which is a fantastic experience, a 2-year program I cannot say enough about. And I worked in the hospital for 5 years, and I loved it, in addition to being a counselor. And it was a lot to manage. And in fact, it's a good point in how do caregivers practice sustainability in caregiving? And during COVID, I realized I need to choose one or the other. I can't I can't balance both careers. And so I settled into my clinical practice, which has been taking care of me. Mm-hmm. I miss working in the hospital and hospice environment. Anyway, that's kind of a snapshot, right, of how I came to be where I am and how I'm here today.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We were talking earlier about how many people do come into this sphere because of personal experiences. And earlier this week, I was at an event, Living Fully, Planning Wisely, and a recurring theme was, well, we don't know what we don't know, but we are never going to learn about this stuff if we don't talk about it. So thank you for being out here and talking about it. I feel like when it comes to your clinical practice now, because you said you were in the hospital, so now with your clinical practice, where does your work with aging people, caregivers, end of life care, who are the types of people that you typically work with, and how do you work with them?
That's a great question. Therapists are very fond. I mean, we're all trying to get by. So we all talk about our specializations and our expertise, and we say, I specialize in X, Y, and Z, end of life care and other things. And really what you specialize in are the people who come to you. We don't choose the clients, they choose us. So in the years since I became a therapist in 2012, something like that, I've learned, so I love working with grief. You know, it's kind of like my origin, right? Of being a helper, a caregiver. But I don't always get to choose it. You know, whoever comes in, and I only, of course, if I feel capable and we work together. So I work with a lot of young adults, a lot of emerging adults. It's a difficult time to be emerging into our cultural reality, you know. And there's often a lot of less than supportive, less than nurturing parenting. So I work with a lot of young adults. I work with people who are dealing, you know, life transitions is another source of grief. And, you know, it's like letting go of career, letting go of parenting. So you know, Stephen Sondheim has a great song from Little Night Music. My dad, you know, played Broadway records for us growing up. It's called Every Day a Little Deaf. You know, there's always beginnings and endings. And we mostly tune out the pain of things that are difficult and challenging. So life transitions, aging, and sometimes it's clients' parents who are aging, and the challenges in their family around that. Conflict with siblings is a huge area for exploration. When you have 3 siblings and they're quarreling around the bedside, or simply quarreling in conversations during the last year of parents' lives, and it's not where we want to be. You know, we want to kind of, so if we would all grow up into awareness and some ability to presence ourselves and have healthy conversations with others, we could be more loving and present and peaceful when we're at the bedside, or when we're talking to our parents about difficult decisions. And obviously that wasn't happening. That's why I really so enjoyed Kicking the Bucket, because you really very beautifully created the scenario that's, you know, it was funny at times, right? There's some humor and levity, but, you know, it's a very real problem, our avoidance of the ultimate ending for our loved ones. So sometimes it's with clients, and sometimes there are people I know who are asking for end of life care from a contemplative perspective. And I'm not always their primary caregiver. I might come in and offer contemplative practices for family members, ethical decision making, you know, what's in the best interest of the patient, helping with medical directives and paperwork. And I mean, chaplains pray in a patient's language. You know, if the patient is Baptist or Presbyterian or a Jewish, we are attuned to their spiritual wishes and we pray that way. So sometimes it's not meditation and contemplative presencing. Sometimes it's prayer. We do what's in service to the patient and their family members. And we help the family members find a way to respect and support their parents' wishes, which is such a huge kicking the bucket moment.
Yeah. Now, okay, so you say, can you define contemplative for me? Because I understand the word, but then what does it mean when you're talking about it within the practice?
Yeah, it's really, you know, I try to vary my language so I don't become hackneyed. You know, meditation is, you know, mindfulness is a diluted, I shouldn't say misused, but it's very broadly used. People, you know, there's a sign in my building that says, please be mindful of your neighbors. And meditation, you know, has a connotation like, well, I'm not a Buddhist, you know, or I'm not a peaceful person. And meditation isn't always about peacefulness. Sometimes it's about interior exploration of what is present and thinking like, oh, I have a lot of anger in me right now. So contemplative is a term that some people use to say, I am being present and reflective, and I am, it's really an adjective, you could be a contemplative is somebody who is not, hopefully somebody who's not on a constant hamster wheel with a life schedule that's like Tetris. They pause, they slow down, they tune in, they contemplate what's happening with my stomach, my chest, my throat, noticing breathing, body temperature. And someone else could say, well, that's meditation. So the words we use are somewhat interchangeable. And I will say that part of attunement for a caregiver is reading the field of the client or the patient or whoever you're standing next to,
Yeah.
So we read them and we try to find the right language. And I would say that, and this is a bit of a nuance, but there are acts of translation on the path of care. So if I see certain indicators that somebody is Christian or some other religion, I don't talk about meditation. I shift into other language. We fine tune our words based on who we're engaged with at the moment. So sometimes I say contemplative because they're not Buddhists, but we're doing something very similar to Buddhist practice of being with and one thing about mindfulness, it's not, we use it, and it's a good word, and I'm not complaining about our use of it. It's better than not having it, but it's not always, peace and calm and smiling like the women on the cover of a yoga magazine who are just like,
yes.
The word from Sanskrit for smriti means, one translation is returning or recalling that which is already present. And presence is awareness of the body, awareness of the feelings, awareness of the thoughts, and awareness of awareness. What am I noticing now? I'm noticing the environment and the person who's suffering. I'm noticing my own revved up energy. I'm noticing I'm sleepy. Being aware of my own, of all of those things is really the term. Yeah. Just thought I would put a plug in there for thinking about etymology now and then.
I love the word derivations. So it's becoming clearer. So you work with people both for the mental health, their emotional health, their spiritual health, and help them to be present. And this makes me think of a question a friend of mine had about the idea of death meditation or the practices for dying. And as you're saying this, I'm understanding a little bit more, because her question was, oh, meditation takes a long time to learn. So if people are just coming into this at the end of life, how do they, I guess, do it properly? But what you're saying is that it's like an overarching term, but it's more about being present, right?
I have a little list here. To my left, I wanted to be able to share some of these practices.
Yeah.
At Upaya and in most sanghas, most Buddhist communities, there's an evening chant. So if we were as let's just say that, this is the country that we live in, and we're Americans, or that, actually I try to say USers. If we all did this verse about impermanence, it could raise our awareness a little bit each day in a very simple way without getting a cushion and incense and bowing with bells. We could just say, the day is ending and our life is one day shorter. Let us look carefully at what we have done. Let us practice diligently, putting our whole heart into the path of being. Let us live deeply in each moment and in freedom so that time does not slip away meaninglessly. Now, that is an end of the day impermanence gatha by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who really brought the term mindfulness to the US in the 60s and 70s. There's another one from Upaya that's a little more, has a little more fierceness to it. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, awaken, take heed. Do not squander your life. Now, if we were to even read those or once a week or think about them, it would begin to, we would begin to build a relationship with the inevitability, right? There's also the 5 remembrances, a short kind of, I am of the nature to grow old. I am of the nature to grow ill. I will have to let go of all of my possessions, belongings, and loved ones. This is true also of everyone I love. And at the end, all I really get to keep are my actions. So there are practices like that. There are books written by wonderfully accessible books by Pema Chodron. People love that one, which is called How We Live is How We Die. Some of the Tibetan Buddhists have books, Living is Dying. And then there is actual death meditation practice. And the reason why I make the distinction is because this is where we actually practice dying. I mean, we read about what happens in the process, and there's a workshop I'm going to next Japan called Departures. And it's actually like we literally go, and Roshi Joan Halifax from Upaya has an amazing program called Being with Dying. The doctors and nurses, often they're not trained in compassion practices or in contemplative practices. So her training has them go through dying in addition to, educational aspects about compassion and being present and attuned. She also has us lying there on our mats we've just gotten a diagnosis. We have 6 months to live. How are we going to use those months? We're now in the last 2 weeks and we're saying goodbye. We're not eating anymore and we're actually actively transitioning. And, it's a very powerful experience. And then there's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which talks about
I ask a little bit more about, the purpose of going through this experience is to raise more awareness of your life? Is it? Yeah,
that's a great question. It's both. Frank Ostaseski's book, The 5 Invitations, is kind of like, you're not gonna, we're impermanent. We're all headed, we're all walking each other home. And why not cherish each day as if it's your last day, right? What would you do if you had a diagnosis? Will you feel like Thoreau, that I sucked the marrow out of life, or I got to the end and I felt that I hadn't lived? And that's from Walden. Let's cherish life. But really, like, some of it is oriented towards live your life so that you feel like you lived your life richly. And then every day is joyful, even when there's misery here and there. But a lot of it is kind of like the mindset of how hard it will be. No matter how spiritually realized or how experienced we are going to be, it's hard. It's frightening. Eventually, everything, all of the people around us disappear, and it's just us. Right. So some of it is really focused on actually dying, and some of it is focused on actually living. And of course, from a Buddhist perspective, those two things are inseparable. The minute we're born, the minute we're 18 or 25 or 30, we're losing brain cells. But we're also growing new brain cells. The cells are dying and the cells are regenerating. So it's really not separable. But that's from a high ultimate perspective. From another perspective, living is what we want and death is what we don't want.
So I'm thinking of the quote from Hamlet, all that lives must die. But I heard from another guest how our brains are actually hardwired to not think about our own mortality. So do you feel that the practice is helping us overcome that hardwired thought?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Andee. I wish we could talk for a long time. Sure, we have a negativity bias. We have an involuntary threat response system in the amygdala, the limbic system, which is the sympathetic nervous system, and we are hardwired to survive. That's the goal. But there are those brain scans of the meditators who meditate, hours each day, and their brains are different than ours, because with practice, we can modify our neurobiology, which is really the only reason people still do therapy. I mean, anything a therapist knows, you can learn from a book, you can read from a podcast, a meme, a group, a workshop. But the relational neurobiology of dynamics and engagement is, so that part of it that's why we do it, Yeah, we can, the live, non-separate dynamic between two people or within ourselves can change our neurostructure, So, we still have the threat response system. I still get out of the way and my heart pounds if I'm in the middle of the street. Yeah. But we can work with our mind and we can work with our nervous system so that we come to terms with the ultimate impermanence of the causes and conditions of our embodied life here on earth, as our aggregated nature composed of various elements and conditions starts to change. The conditions aren't sufficient anymore, and this embodied life ends.
Yeah. So okay, then it feels like this kind of understanding you work a lifetime on to get to this point. Can we talk really quickly about how you might bring some of these little practices to somebody like Dolores and Howard, who come to you at the very end, and then we'll transition into how the Tamikas and Jareds, the caregivers, the kids, how it's important for their psyche as well and help them, and I guess a longer term.
Yeah. In a way, the conundrum is with Tamika and Jared. And you wrote it to highlight a problem, which is that people are not listening. People are not curious. Family members are. Some family members are, right? Some have done readings and trainings, but overall there's this illiteracy, as you've mentioned. So, there's a frustration with, even though you understand that she's dealing with a situation, Jared is like flippantly quick and ready to, he's disengaged. And so is Tamika in a slightly different way. And, if they would slow down, be curious about the pain that they're avoiding, and be generous and have conversations, it would be very different. You wouldn't need to have written it. So, if we could address the larger problem, if everyone could learn to come to terms with it, we wouldn't have the problem. But we do. That's who we are. We're a young adolescent country, and that's our problem. So to answer your question more specifically, we can build a relationship with somebody very quickly. I mean, we're talking about something short term, like being present, soft, caring, tender tone, asking questions, being respectful, not treating them like children, and saying, how is it for you? What you're experiencing? And do you have thoughts and wishes? Have you been able to talk with your family about what's on your mind, what you're scared of, what you would like? Can we talk about this? And hopefully, meaning Howard and Dolores, then get to say, I don't want to go into a nursing home. And I don't want to, I don't want to live any longer with lung cancer. And so, to the extent that we can help people in each state with their different rules and guidelines, I know somebody who's moving to Oregon soon, or not soon, but at some point. So, what's possible is there's a systemic problem with our medical culture, which works in tandem with our own avoidance of the conversations. We don't get a lot of support about what our choices are. And so, I mean, ideally, we would all be doing this work before we're in the hospital or the hospice environment, but oftentimes that's not the case. So we do the work there. What does the patient want? That's often, we have to remind the family, this is not, it's not, unless there's a person who is not of capacity, and the MPOA is the one. But when the family is conscious, the parents or older family member, the person who's dying, they're not always older, we need to hear them. We need to respect them. We need to do whatever we can to honor their needs. And that's where the dysfunctional families, or the blended and separated families, and the unhealthy dynamics show up. And so it can be very messy, but there are skillful ways to build relationships and remind everybody of what's important.
So if you don't happen to have a Jinji on hand, what are there little small techniques that a caregiver can use, or the adult kid with their siblings? Like how can you, I'm hearing first listen, but if you're surrounded by people who don't want to listen, are there small techniques that you can use to kind of break through that barrier of not listening?
I don't want to turn your question on its head, but I will say that the ultimate barrier is to have your medical paperwork and update it so your wishes are expressed, and the medical professionals have that. But I know what you're getting at.
That medical paperwork those wishes have to be shared with the family too, right?
Well, they should be. It's intelligent to, but it's not up to the family. If you have a capable adult of any age with their wishes, the medical community prioritizes that adult. They get to make that choice regardless of their family. So it can get very dicey. I mean, I've seen some beautiful scenarios in the hospice and hospital, and I've seen some really toxic, harmful ones where they're not listening, they're overruling. One sibling is, an aggressive sort of bully in the family, and they're not honoring, or sometimes it's a spouse who's not honoring. I think I mentioned at the end of the listening group that I'd had a personal unpleasant situation with my father's end of life. First of all, there's no guarantees of dying well. Ira Byrok's book. It's something to aspire to and prepare for in various ways throughout our life, but there's no guarantee. So What we can do is have conversations with our kids as we're getting older, with our partners, with our communities and friends, and be more open about the whole thing. So quick tips is please slow down and tune in to the engine that runs us. Engine can run very high and fast, can run very slow and sluggish. And let's have a healthy conversation. So let's develop our listening skills and maintain curiosity, maintain compassion, maintain respect. It's really important. It's important for all of us. Compassion is really, kind of encompasses compassion trainings, compassion practices, books that focus on that include all of the things I've just said,
Yeah. We always run out of time in the conversation, but do you want to? I know before we were talking about the caregiver psyche, because the compassion, I believe, plays right into the compassion for yourself as well, especially if you're a caregiver and you need to not burn out. So if it's okay, can we just cover the last little bit just in terms of the caregiver psyche and burnout?
Yes. I will say that in a way, this is, I didn't realize it, but it turns out to be a main focus of my work these days as a caregiver trainer and educator, and of course in my own practice. And it's so how we enter the path of care, nurses, EMTs, firefighters, medicine, therapists, social workers, social justice workers, rescue people. It's so rich and storied. Sometimes everyone in my family, my dad's a teacher, my mom's a firefighter, or oftentimes it's more personal. Either way, we're all prone to a variety of things that can really get in the way of our self-care, and it can get in the way of capable ethical care of others. So a lot of therapists are, a lot of caregivers rather, lapse into rescuer, fixer, savior, martyr archetypes. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. We all have our imperfect natures, which are, of course, perfect, right? We all have basic goodness. And we're also human, and we have our tendencies. So there are caregiver shadow sides, and I have a whole list of them that I can't share with you now, but we're just humans. There's a lot of spiritual bypassing in the caregiver community, kind of like, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm prepared, I'm enlightened, I'm trained, nothing hurts me. And it's sort of an end run around the pain. So caregiving itself can be an end run around our own dysfunction, our own neuroses. There are many caregivers who are rescuing and over functioning, and then they burn out, and then they can often flip from being wonderfully tending to being very disengaged and brazen. So, there are people I know who are better with their patients and their students, teachers, than they are with their own family members or their helpers, but their own lives are in terrific disarray. So,
can you tell me really quickly? So you said, and it's the caregivers, often the rescuers, I wrote it down, rescuers, savers, but
it's a tendency. I'm not saying it.
I think, but it feels to me like, then what is the definition of care? Because I think of it the same way. I'm like, oh, if you're caring, you're taking care of this, right? So then how should we be thinking about the definition of care differently?
Well, Well, in chaplaincy, we say that we are walking alongside.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there to fix the situation. We're there to be with the patient, presence them with compassion and equanimity. If we over identify with anyone's suffering, we go into empathic distress. And people call that compassion fatigue, but it's not really compassion. It's really over identifying, and going into our own distress. And then we burn out and have secondary trauma. If it's genuine compassion, it's balanced by equanimity. And I'll leave you, you know what? You asked me for one practical tip that's very sort of succinct. Soft front, strong back. We need the soft front of compassion, but if we don't have the strong back of equanimity, then we're going to overfunction, collapse, and go into empathic distress. So that's really important. And anyone can, first of all, anyone is welcome to email me, contact me, and ask me for, have a lot of resources about this. The term rescuer comes from a drama triangle model where there's somebody who acts like the savior, somebody who can actually be aggressive when they're helping because they know what's best and they want to fix it. Why do they want to fix it? Could be ego, could be to solve the hurt of their own pain. But they can become a perpetrator. So like how we help others is so important. So it really comes back to compassion, equanimity, and respect.
Yeah.
There's too much more to say, so
There's
I won't.
too much more.
I know.
So I guess in terms of one question that has been kind of sticking in the back of my brain from what you said at the very beginning, it was, you said that hospitals don't hire counselors, they hire chaplains. So do you know why that is? Like, because I feel like, why is it important that we keep mental health? Because at the end of life, people are all about the physical and the spiritual. So is it important to keep the mental health present at the end of life too? Or is it okay to say, yeah, we're just switching over to the physical and the spiritual now?
I have to say, you just have like the best questions. I wanted to be a therapist. And so I did that. And then I think I told you, I saw Scrubs on television. And I was like, oh my God, I want to work in the hospital. Well, now what the hospital does is they hire social workers. Social workers can also be therapists, but the training is a bit different. And social workers tend to work more in community settings where they have a lot of systems, resources, and so in the hospital, there are social workers who take care of insurance verification, transferring to rehab and skilled nursing. They're not doing any direct patient care. I mean, they could be a kind person, but their job is not patient care. The hospital is all about medical care. We want to help you and then discharge you. But people don't always get to go home. And even if they do, there can be great suffering. So the chaplains are there. Historically, the chaplains are there to pray. As we become, I mean, we are still a predominantly Christian country, and people do pray. Even spiritual but not religious people pray. Yeah. But really, I mean, the vast majority of the time, what I did at the hospital was help people with medical paperwork and having family conversations about ethical decision making, like, when do we withdraw care? I mean, this is what your mom asked for, and you are all wanting to bypass that. So we have a very nurturing, caring conversation about that. So the chaplains, another term for it is pastoral counseling. We do counseling. I have sat by the bedside and we've talked about, what it was like to take care of her husband with ALS for 8 years and how her health debilitated. So we do counseling, but some do it, I would say some do it better than others or more neutral than others. So some of it is counseling, but they're not, I mean, a therapist is generally, counseling is a longer term trade. You're going to see someone for 6 months to 2 years. You're going to help them with their communication. It's kind of goal oriented, and it's not end of life focus. And frankly, the budget just doesn't allow it, and they really don't care. I mean, the hospitals have a very mono focus on medical and release. And yes, if you're devastated, we'll have a chaplain who can pray and also multitask with medical paperwork.
That it's well, I guess I'm thinking about how it leads to burnout, because you have to put up, if you're working in that arena, you have to put up the barrier, because it may not seem like all of that mental emotional health or that it's in there, because they're focused on just the body or the medical, but it's present around everybody. So
are you talking about the patient?
I'm thinking about everybody actually now. So it's the medical people who are helping the patient. It's the people who are there to support the patient, or the loved ones, the caregiver, then the other people around them who are providing support, whether they're family or workers. It's everyone. The mental health, emotional health is,
100%.
it seems to me like that's at the top of everything, but it's the
No.
area that has to be ignored a little bit.
You just named the elephant in the room. It's I tried to set up a program based on the GRACE model, which is so succinct and effective. You could do GRACE in 2 minutes or 30 seconds, or you could do a 2-day workshop. And I'll tell you what it stands for. And if anyone's interested, they can ask a question or contact. It didn't go through, leadership was like, yeah, this is great, but we don't have the bandwidth. It would have helped the nurses. The doctors get to come in, and I'm not, this is not a criticism of doctors. It's an acknowledgement of how the medical profession is organized. They come in as laser-like specialists and they leave. And I think that's what they should do. The age of bedside manner is past. And who does that? The techs, the attendants, the nurses, the nurses have 12-hour shifts, and they have very difficult lives as a result of that. And I work with a lot of nurses, and I do workshops and hospice as well. It would be so life-giving and sustaining for them and for all patients and for the whole system if they gave them this practice of a brief gather your awareness and drop into your body, recall your intention. Why are you really here? Right? Why did you choose this work, and what's important today? Attune to yourself, body, feelings, thoughts. Attune to the person you're with. Read them as far as you can. Attune to them. Consider what will best serve. That's what's the next compassionate right action. And then E is engage, enact and end. And there are studies that show that if nurses and other caregivers do that in between patients and clients, that the patients could tell the difference between the nurses that did that and the nurses that did not do that. So if everyone would practice a simple gather my awareness, recalling what's important for me today in this place, in this role, attuning to myself, attuning to the other, consider what will truly serve compassionately, and then do it. And then end it. And the end it is important, so you're not carrying the remainder over into the next patient's room.
Yeah.
So I would, I wish that I could have stayed in the hospital and done that, but they didn't want to do it. And COVID came, and I couldn't support myself on $18 an hour. So but my passion is to work with caregivers in these workshops on the ethics of sustainable care, because if you're going to burn out, you can't continue to show up. And that's, the ethics is, you can rely on me. I will be here reliably for you, and I will be well regulated, and I'm not going to overfunction, and I'm not going to underfunction. I'm going to be attuned and present and compassionate. So
That's a beautiful way to end actually too, because of the end. When I was younger and doing acting classes, um, I was being taught a method where you're reacting to the emotions in the scene, but then our teachers never told us to basically end this emotion and cap it in the room. And so we were left going out into the world, and you were kind of on fire, taking all these emotions in and reacting to everything. And so it's so
Wow.
important to
I
end
remember
it.
the same thing. I left
Yeah.
acting because it felt so vulnerable. And if
Yeah.
they had just said, our exercise is over, find your
Yes.
feet, where are your feet? Because our feet are our first support or our bottom on the chair. And just take a breath and look around. And there are so many practices that can help. I wish that I had answered better when you said succinct practices, because there's grace, soft front, strong back, and then there's rain by Tara Brach. Recognize, acknowledge, um, investigate, and then nurture.
And
So,
all of those can be used as you're caring for somebody. Right? You can come in, even if you're like not in a professional, you come
you know
into your
something?
loved one's room or space. You're like, you use the grace method. You bring yourself right there. You can
I'm
kind of
so
end
glad you
it.
said that, because um, where are we not in a caring relationship? If you're in traffic, you're in a relationship where care is appropriate. You let someone in. If
Mhm.
you're in the supermarket and someone, I mean, every step along the way is, if there's a relationship, the word care is there. And so it's so doable for people to say, oh, I can tell that I'm really activated right now. I'm irritated by what you said, but I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to put my hand on my belly, a hand on my chest, and breathe. And I'm going to come back and we'll continue speaking. And, that's yet another version of grounding, slowing down, and speaking for feelings, but not from feelings. And it's respectful, and it can be with a coworker, a roommate, a customer service person. On customer service is really a challenging role. Everyone's got a problem and they're angry or frustrated. So it really, like, there's no end to the capacity to be a caring human being. So that's why it matters so much to me. I mean, it helps me be care for myself and be kind to others. And I mean, I don't always get it right, but I come back, and if I don't get it right, it's like something must be up for me. I must be struggling in some way. So now it's self-compassion, right? Yeah. That's probably enough.
Ah, Jinji, we could talk forever. Okay, thank you
Let's do
so
it.
much. And if people have more questions for you, the chat, but or the socials, but also follow the link below. I'm looking here because this is my screen, my monitor. Follow the link down below to Jinji's website, jinjicounseling.com, with any questions, or if you want to get to know her better. Next week, we are going to have a conversation with Emily Kyle and Carrie Costa from Good Grief about
Excellent.
death administration and death traditions. It's actually going to be on Monday next week because we had some scheduling difficulties. So thank you again, Jinji. Thank you to all of you who are listening now or later in the future. We're going to sign off now. Follow the links to Kicking the Bucket and Jinji. I'm going to say goodbye. And
As where the end is just the beginning, I look forward to more sharing with you and with the community you're building. And I'm grateful that I had a chance to be here today. Thank you so much.
thank you, Jinji. Okay, we're going to sign off. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.